let's just do that. Okay, should we start the webinar now?
Yep.
Okay, so let's start. So good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us. We currently have 22 and counting attendees on the webinar. It's going to be approximately 90 minutes. Originally, we anticipated it was an hour. And in fact, as we had content announcements to make and we put the slides together and all the coordination, we realized it's probably better to allow the extra 30 minutes if you have time. And so we actually have a Q&A session as well. The session will be recorded today, and the intention then is to then put it up as a video so then people can listen to it if they are able to attend the whole session, or if they have some points or things they didn't actually pick up on, they can then replay the video. So we are 17:02. I'm actually in Asia, so I'm in the afternoon. So welcome everybody. This is actually the first International PMO Day. It was an initiative by a number of PMO groups that decided to get together and actually celebrate people working in the PMO field, including academic researchers. In fact, we just put a post up to thank all the academic researchers on LinkedIn, as invariably they are more reserved or quieter than the practitioner community. So what we'd like to do in 90 minutes is to actually share good practice. It's not best practice, but good practice. We actually have some announcements to make, as well as in general raising awareness. And there's other points as well, and I'll explain really the full purpose in 2 or 3 slides time about the International PMO Day. So the first quote we have, and I actually use this quite a lot, knowledge built on strong foundations will have a long and beneficial life. I think this is important because there's so much information that's out there, and a lot of it is sort of suspect. Even when you hear these quotes from international organizations, for example, they say 50% of PMOs fail within 2 years. It was actually gained from another international organization who totally misunderstood the research paper where it came from. In fact, as you'll see from a slide, we'll actually show you some facts and figures, is that we have no idea the number of PMOs actually fail. So if you don't know the number of PMOs, yes, you can do a sample, but there's no real research, and that's actually one topic that we're intending to do with one of the research students for this year. So making sure that what we present is actually empirical, or is factual, or robust, or we've actually checked it out. So that's an important quote. So a bit of background, I'm going to introduce myself, then I'll ask Martin and then Ritu as well to introduce themselves afterwards. So my name is Robert Jocelyn. I'm actually Swiss and English, so I spent my first half of my life in England and then my second half in Switzerland. In fact, I traveled quite a lot. I've always worked in projects since the age of 6 or 7 years old, working in my father's workshop in electronic engineering. I'm a chartered engineer. I've worked across different industries, and I've worked for some of the top consulting companies, as well as having 2 or 3 companies myself, owning part or complete. I sort of moved into the academic world at the age of 50 because actually I found I had more questions than answers. And in fact, then I've spent my time bridging between the academic and then actually the practitioner world. And during this time, I've written several books. We've just published 2 recently in the last 9 months. And then there's a lot of other book chapters and research papers, mainly in the field of project program portfolio, PMO management. I also do peer reviewing for academic journals when I have the time, and I've designed all the lifecycle frameworks and methods for AI PMO. So now if I can hand over to Martin.
Thank you, Robert. First of all, I would like to thank for the opportunity to present our successful case of establishing and running a project management office. Hello all, my name is Martin Martinov. I'm a director of the project management office of Telelink Infra Services. It's a service integrator, one of the largest service integrator companies in Bulgaria. It's part of a Telelink group, which has another 4 companies in Europe. I myself have more than 25 years of experience in project management, specifically on the technological field, transportation and construction. I had the great opportunity to live 15 years in United Arab Emirates in Dubai, where, as you probably know, some of the biggest infrastructure projects were run and are currently running. That's where I got the most of my experience in this career. Also there I worked with the top consulting and construction companies, and pretty much all the experience that I'm employing now as director of project management office comes from there. Certified with AI PMO in the expert level. Also, I'm a PMI member, project management professional, and risk management professional certified.
Thank you, Martin. Appreciate that. So Martin's actually going to be doing the case study because we've actually known Martin now for a number of years. He was on the IPMOP course when he set up the first PMO, then went on the expert to look at multiple PMOs, designing a PMO topology or a team of sort of PMOs. So we'll talk about that a bit later on. Now, if I can introduce you to Ritu. She's our senior editor and been working with us for the last few years, and is primarily responsible to make sure that she whips me into shape and on looking at making sure we produce high quality publications. So I can hand over to Ritu.
Thanks, Robert, and hi, everyone. My name is Ritu Chandna. I have been part of AI PMO for more than 2 years, and my main role includes reviewing the content. So basically books, websites, and also other materials such as course materials. I have also been working on the glossary, which will soon be live on the new AI PMO website. With regards to my experience, I have been working as an editor for more than 17 years. I have a lot of experience in editing books, a large number of journals, magazines, and also ILT and WBT content. And my recent project here in AI PMO included editing 3 books. The last 3 books, I'm sure many of you would be familiar with the 3 books that we have on Amazon, and those are live. And later on in the webinar, I'll also talk briefly about the AI PMO book review process, how we do it, why we do it, and what are the key criteria for being an AI PMO book reviewer. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. So now to the main part of the presentation. In fact, sorry, I'm looking over this side because I've got 2 screens here. So the camera's here and I'm just looking slightly to the left. So apologies for that. So when you're looking at the purpose of a celebration day, I actually sort of looked up and saying, well, do people actually celebrate their own day, or is it really you celebrate, for example, Father's Day or Mother's Day? So in other words, you celebrate your father or mother. In fact, you do celebrate, your own profession. And some of the key points that came out, and I sort of tailor this for the PMO world, is a way in which we come together, we can celebrate their achievements over the past year. So yes, we are actually virtual, all of us, but we can still celebrate in our own way, and also within the teams that you work in. And I'm sure as you achieve your goals and you have certain deadlines that you celebrate between the actual PMO day. The second one is announcements. So new initiatives such as research projects. In fact, we're going to be talking about 3 new research projects. And I'll also talk about how you write standards and publications, give you some good practice insights for that. The next one is sharing good practices in the area of PMO management, but of course it's project management, program management, etc. A way in which you can showcase your work, and hence why Martin is present with us today, presenting new reports, books, etc. So we're going to make an announcement on a particular book, and then just raise awareness about projects and PMO management to key stakeholders. In fact, I put 2 posts up, or maybe 3 posts in the last 2 days. And actually one reference is Stuart Dixon from the UK, who was saying about 15 years ago, there were very few books. I think he mentioned 2 books on the whole area of PMO. In 2017, when I was giving courses, I was wondering why isn't there like a profession, and we actually looked into some research as to what constitutes the profession. And really, you need to have a domain. And so really, it's PMO, which is the entity, and PMO management is the domain, just like project management, program management. And that's what we coined the term PMO management. And in fact, some of the academics will say, well, what's the difference of OPM and PMO management? Well, actually, it's actually explained within this new book announcement that we're going to actually present later on. So these are sort of the 6 areas that we touch upon, some more so than others. So the agenda for today is, one is a raising awareness of good practice. So we'll explain actually how we look at our focus in creating knowledge and sharing knowledge and raising awareness. And I think there's a number of you that I recognize actually on the participants that do regularly attend our webinars. And hopefully you see the effort we put into it. So for example, this webinar took us about 3 days full time to actually put it together, and it actually uses slides from other webinars, and every webinar that we create for an hour typically takes 1 to 2 days of work to put together. So it's not done lightly, because we want to make sure it all fits. So we then look at good practice. We explain about the risks of writing suboptimal publications, especially standards. This is something that if you are going to influence tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people and projects, everybody, I'm sure, has seen a project that hasn't run well. So if you actually have been on a project that fails, it's actually, I've seen people, health problems, and old age, all sorts of issues that have with it. And so you have, as writing a standard or guides, a great responsibility further than just the actual guide, but the people and the groups and the organizations you influence. So I'll give you some of the risks associated with this from the experience over the last 20 years. And how do we approach to our publications? So we actually use the sort of motto from Otto von Bismarck. A nice way of putting it, he says, a smart man learns from his own mistakes, a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. So I'll actually show you some of the risks, and you can then interpret about which organization creates standards in that particular way. And then you can then draw your own judgment. We then go through the books we published. What is a standard, and what do we base ours on? Lagging versus leading standards, links to certifications, and some insights from that. Then I'll hand over to Martin, and then we have our announcement, and then we've got some research topics, and then I'll hand over to Ritu for call for reviewers for this new publication announcement, and then Q&A at the end. That's the structure for the next 90 minutes. So just quickly on AI PMO, the Association of International Project Management Officers, I just quickly go through this. So our vision, this is actually where we want to get to. We want to put the building blocks into place for PMO management. We put them into place, then we have a chance of it being actually a recognized profession. And there's a very good research paper, or in fact a thesis by Dr. Paul Gimignano that actually looked at, is project management a profession or not? And his assessment is it wasn't, but a number of the criteria in there are questionable in the modern days. And this is something we looked at the PMO side and what we can contribute from AI PMO, and then have the aim or our vision to actually help put it into place. So the mission is that why are we here for you, is that we want to advance the theory, design, and implementation of high-performing collaborative PMOs. Keyword is collaborative. Currently, PMOs work a lot by themselves, but if you look at PMOs collaborating, enabling, empowering, then you have a chance of actually creating a sustainable, measurable organizational impact. So we choose these words very carefully. And the strategy is how we get from where we are to where we want to achieve. And this is actually evolving the strategic lifecycle framework. So if you see the publications, you'll have seen one or both if you've been on the courses. And in fact, for this new publication that we're going to announce, we've integrated 9 frameworks together. So it's taken us some time to go and do that. So everything is structured. It's like a systems approach of actually building something. So this is through research, through development, through partnering, and actually putting these building blocks, again, to support PMO management as a profession. And then we have partners that actually help apply. And once we've introduced our new website, then we're going to start looking at getting more partners. The thing is, we're taking more of a European concept where we want to walk before we run, So therefore, we want to make sure that everything is solid. The books are published, or the main ones are. This will be the fourth one that's coming out, and we have another 3 or 4 afterwards. And then it gives everybody a solid foundation, or the partners and all the people, to then use as a basis to then implement their PMOs or PMO target operating models. So some facts and insights. We did this about in November 2022. And in fact, we were looking at the number of people with PMOs in the title on LinkedIn, and I think it was 830,000. Then Ritu very kindly updated this yesterday or today, and we actually found the number of people using PMO in their title from these countries has dropped, and in some countries rather than others. Not sure what that still sort of signifies, but we have round about from the 12 countries, 714,000. There's probably on LinkedIn in total, maybe about 900 to 1 million people in their title. And so there's probably about 250,000 PMOs. There's 3 to 4 people in a PMO on average. So this is the word PMO used in the name, but what we don't know is that people don't actually use PMO in their title. And having worked in different projects, consulting projects, trying to find actually a section, is it a PMO or not, when they don't actually use the name? You know, is it called, for example, ETSD, Engineering Technical Service Department? Is it a portfolio a realization office, a center of excellence? There's many other titles that people use that is just a name, but in reality what they're doing is sort of PMO work. So we don't really know how many people work in PMO, nor do we really know how many PMOs exist. What else is there on this one? Yeah, so that's just some key findings. So when we look at the research, we want to understand more about this, and this is one of the research students were picking up on this topic. This actually is a picture of Switzerland. Oops, sorry, let's go back. This one here. So this is actually AIPMO is a Swiss organization. This is the Lake of Zurich, so Zurich's just here, and we're just sort of based about here. So we're actually in the same village as Roger Federer and Martina Hingis. Seems to be like a tennis village for some reason. In fact, Hamilton used to live up the road from where I actually live. So I actually live in that same village. So sharing some good practice. Another quote. This is from an educator and the former president of Harvard Business Review. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. Very nice sort of quote. This is a real, very good example about ignorance. So when Madame Curie discovered radiation in 1920s, straight away they thought that was good for you. So they created radium chocolate, radium cigarettes, radium butter. Then after about 5 to 10 years, people started dying of cancer. So they really had no idea what they discovered. And this is the risk, is that when you actually do something, you may be working on your PMO, there are PMOs that are actually value destroyers rather than value creators. And I've actually seen 1 or 2 in my career as well. And that's because they had no idea what they were doing. They had no guidance, or what the guidance they had was actually poor guidance, and it didn't actually apply to what they're doing. And this is something that we've got to try to reduce, is this ignorance. So let's have a look at when you're writing publications like standards. So when you have people coming on the courses, when you talk to them, they'll always argue from the point of what they know. What they don't know doesn't exist. So if you look at the Black Swan event, so in England, we talk about the Black Swan, a very rare event. The reality is in England and Europe, we don't get black swans. And I think it was a Dutch gentleman in the 17th century who went to Australia and realized they're full of black swans. And I guess this is sort of how the term came about. So if you don't know something, ignorance, and that's the thing, is that we want to get out of being from ignorant to in a position of knowledge and understanding. And you can see that within countries where they have a very good middle class and people are well educated, it makes a big difference. And it's the same true as well in a very complex area like project management, PMO management, project portfolio management. The second one is that if you have an industry or a profession that's in a mess and you try to standardize a mess, you're going to keep it in a mess. And there's actually a difference between standards and standardize. And when you have somebody that you work in an organization that says, we do it this way because it's best practice, really there's no such thing as best practice unless it's incredibly simple. When it's normally, in our field, it's complicated or complex, that means there's many ways of doing something. So you must be very careful if you're looking at standardizing. And this is an example here in the US, where they try to standardize in the healthcare sector, and basically they sort of destroyed it because you try to put everything doing the same way to standardize it. It just didn't work out. So standards are not the same thing as to standardize. And the next thing is that when you write something, you want to make sure that there's no bias. So when I do research, and as I say, I started at the age of 50 doing my research, and I had to basically relearn everything because what I knew in the practitioner world wasn't really applicable in the research world. And the things they do in the research is to make sure everything is valid and it's not biased. And I had a student, I'm actually a professor at Swiss Business School, and I have a number of research students. One of them that she wanted to prove that there shouldn't be another PMO beside herself because she had a competing PMO she didn't like. So I told her to change her topic because she's totally biased. So this is the thing is that when you're writing standards, having written them in the US for PMI, having done the same thing with the British government. Before Axelis, it was before Office of Government and Commerce, it was called CCTA. And then having written also AI PMO and my PhDs in standards and methods, is that people will write about what they know, what exists, or they actually want to push their own topics into the standard and their own terminology. And this is the thing I found actually at one of the organizations is that people were there not necessarily for the interest of the organization or for the others, they were interested there for themselves and wanted to push the terms because they were doing some doctorate or some had an area of interest. So you need to make sure there is no bias when you're writing these things. Another one to watch out for is that writing a standard is incredibly complicated, or writing a document, especially one that evolves of different versions. And I've seen this, I was recently on a mega project, having a very intricate set of, they call it planner works in construction. People will come in as consultants and they don't understand it because there's too much to it. And they start pulling it apart and therefore it just doesn't work. And it's the same thing as well with a standard. Having now evolved the standards or the frameworks of AI PMO, it is so complicated. There's so much tacit knowledge that what you don't want to do is change the team every time you create a new version. And that's probably why if you look at the PMI's program standard, from version 1 to version 2 is total change, from version 2 to version 3, total change, even including the life cycles, because people want to sort of create something new, they want to sort of show their effect. And that's what you don't want to do. Because you have more of an evolution than a revolution on standards. And I'll explain some insights, or I'll show you some things which I think you might find quite insightful. So also, when you have authors that write, they invariably write from their own view. So if you're from England, you don't know black swans exist, then you just write that particular view. So England's more service sector, it's not actually construction. If you go to the Middle East, it's more construction. So if you had somebody in the Middle East writing standards, it'd be much more from a construction point of view, and the ways you do measurements and sizing, things like this. So there's some things, for example, in the P3O standard from Axelis that don't actually work for capital intensive industries. It's because the people that wrote it were from the service sector. So that's why you need to have people that have different views and more of a world view than a local view. The other one, when you write standards, is they take a long time to write. So having been on one of them, it was over a 2 to 3 year period. You're meant to volunteer for your time. They're often, you're there for the weekend and things are not really sort of finished off. People's motivation there is really just good enough. I actually spent 3 months not paid on this, and I spent a lot of extra time because of all the ambiguities of the problems to try to get this thing to actually work. So really that you want to be very careful in the teams, changing the teams, having world views rather than local views. Otherwise that you will likely suffer these sort of risks here. And finally, if you have a standard or you have publications that have problems, you need to really change that way of actually thinking, because otherwise you're going to just create the same thing over and over again. I think it was Einstein said the definition of insanity is when you do the same thing and expect a different outcome. So it's very true. You do need to look at different perspectives and have people to go and see that, different perspectives and actually what works and what doesn't. So an example is that when we look for reviewers, we actually writing use cases. So we actually test this new publication to see it covers different perspectives. So they'll be done actually in series and then looking at different parts to it and then running in parallel and then series again. So we've got quite a sophisticated way of actually reviewing it to make sure the publication is fit for use. Just like an aeroplane is, you wouldn't expect it to Boeing to sell it without testing it, and the same with Airbus. And it's the same thing with standards. So how do we go about looking into our publications in AI PMO? But if you look at knowledge and skills, so knowledge is what you've gained, it's more the theoretical, and skills are what you got. You actually apply it. So you've got the ability to apply something, you create a result that gives you experience. So if you look at world experience, so this is all the people in the world, and you can maybe look at AI now as well. If you use ChatGPT, which I'm sure most of you have, it's rather big. So everything exists. If you look at personal experience, only what I know exists. What I don't know just doesn't exist. And you'll see this when you argue with people, is they argue from their knowledge. And this is also why when you get two experts together, and I've seen this when I was at McKinsey and also other situations of professors, is they just argue at each other and don't want to listen to the other one because they've got their own point of view. So I write what I know, what I'm based on, and that's actually this little dot here compared with a worldview. So what happens then when everything exists, you actually want to determine the best topic. So whatever that is, whether you're doing something on data-driven PMOs or a standard or something like this, and then you actually carry out research. So you take research studies, and then a research study normally involves 300 companies if it's quantitative, maybe 20 companies if it's qualitative. That's when you dig in deep. And then what you do is that you then take the best of this one over here, because you've got a wide sample, and you apply the standards team and you test it, testing in the courses and testing in other ways, you improve it and you write your publications. So this is actually quite a long process. But it's not long in the sense that the data gets out of date. It's long in the sense of making sure it's rigorous and it's robust and it's not biased. And there's only just ourselves that do it this way, along with Half Double Institute in Denmark, do this similar approach. So how do we actually look at research-driven publications? So here's a part of the framework. In fact, we have a new version of the framework coming up in this new publication. So we take research journals, we've got the advisory board with Professor Rolf Muller and the other researchers. We have other sources of information. We then put it into the certification courses, we test it, and then we write it into books. So this was the first book that came out last year. It took us 3 years to write. This is the next book that was published in November. This was actually then in February this year. And we're working on this particular book, Data-Driven PMOs. So there's actually 3 or 4 authors working on this. So this is the approach that we actually take, and we've got other books as well. And in fact, what we've done is taken a systems approach of how we actually write it. The whole research is the same, but making sure that we have the whole principles of actually writing these books. And so all of these are actually available on Amazon for the people in Saudi Arabia, because it's hard to actually get access. We actually have a publisher in Saudi Arabia that we can tell you. So now let's look about what is a standard. So I was actually asked to look at the sort of terms and definitions for one of these mega projects. And so it was very interesting actually what you sort of discover. So first of all, looking at a standard, and it can be interpreted in different ways. So Oxford talks about a level of quality. This is the Oxford Dictionary. PMI talks about level of consensus. So something that can be reused, repeatable, provide guidelines for a specific result, common repeatable use again. And then this one looks at a regulatory sub-instrument. So it actually has a legal implication, something that's mandatory. Whereas you get another one that talks about voluntary, which is not legally enforceable. The point is there's little common definition or agreement about what is a standard. Everybody's sort of got their own views on this, what we've seen so far. So what AI PMO does is that we looked at actually what is the gold standard out there. So, and I know PMI talk about their gold standard, but the reality is that ISO, International Standards Organization, they have a structure which we follow very closely. Every standard they have is principles, frameworks, models, and the descriptions and additional content. So AI PMO, when we write to this particular approach. And you'll see this actually in all the documents we go and create. So this will be our sort of approach of actually writing. So let's get into more details about standards. There's a thing called a leading standard and a lagging standard. So a leading standard is based on ideas and concepts from top performing organizations. You can only achieve it by taking research, because you're unlikely to go to 300 companies and then find out who are the best ones and what they're doing. Now, for one part of the framework, another part to another 300 companies would take you too long. So we actually have access to thousands of research papers, of which we then filter down, and also we have our own students. And we actually focus in very much focused research. The last lot of research is looking at culture, We got 3 research findings that came out, and that's actually driving or filling a piece of the element of the framework we're actually doing. So that's a research-driven approach. A lagging standard is actually based on mainstream ideas within across the industries. Invariably, it's written from a few people that are more experienced, and it's much more of a topic-based, and they may be using a framework or two. In fact, I didn't really use these terms. It was PMI when I was on the core committee of the portfolio standard. We were discussing some ideas about coming in there, and the guy goes, "This is not a leading standard, this is a lagging standard." So PMI actually know about these definitions themselves. So what does it really mean? Well, this is the distribution of, say, a research study. The lagging standards are invariably sort of in the middle here, whereas the leading standards look at the top performing organizations, and they can do that because they've got the research findings, and they can also got the qualitative part where they can actually look at the interviews and actually go into more depths of why that was more successful in that particular organization. And in our case is that we have our own students. So we actually don't use secondary research. We actually got primary research we have access to. The only catch, we've got to wait 2 years or so before we get the first set of findings coming out. So that's about standards, lagging, leading standards, and you see the differences. And then you see certifications and what they're actually based on. So, many are based on lagging standards. There's also some based on leading standards, and these are all based off terminology, methods, and frameworks, which is on some sort of body of knowledge. So it's based on something. So if you look at now why people get certified, this is actually from a webinar that I gave about 9 months ago. So I thought I'd actually reuse this slide. Why do people actually want to get certified? And I went across the internet, and these are all sort of practical and no academic references. So getting certified for reasons, why get certified, etc. So it seems to be that getting hired seems to be the primary reason, then earning money and keeping yourself current. So very much a strong personal motivation, but also management are very keen that people get certified because it gives them some sort of confidence in their people. You get happier teams, commitment to the profession. These are sort of the key reasons behind. So if you actually look at a lagging standard now, so if you don't know about standards that are written, that are valid, robust, unbiased, all you've got is like a lagging standard. So we put these factors down here. 1 means positive, -1 means negative, and neutral. You don't really have any comparison. So what you're thinking you're getting is really good. You're getting satisfaction, credibility, justifying your costs. But if you actually sort of compare against a research-driven approach, then what you actually have is a comparison. You realize actually, does it give you personal satisfaction that you're actually learning from people's experience versus something that has a truly a global view and can actually be backed up by a reference or by valid and reliable information? Does it show initiative that you have something that's invariably a local view rather than a global view, etc.? So this actually gives you a comparison between the two. So for all the people that are actually looking at getting certification, and this webinar, we actually were saying about how there are so many certificates out there talking about master certificate and all these other sort of terms they actually use. Do work out what is the body of knowledge? What is it actually based on? Is the certificate actually worth something behind it? Who are the people that actually wrote it? How often is it actually updated? These sort of questions you want to ask. So if you look at an analogy, say you take an iPhone analogy, is that a lagging standard, if it hasn't been updated, like, so for example, P3O, not picking on just P3O, but it was in 2013. That's when the iPhone 5 came out. If you look at 2023 and beyond, that's like an iPhone 14. So with our standards or with our certifications, we actually update it at least once per year because the latest research, it's a very different philosophy to the way the others do it. So if the aim for you is to standardize and be the same as everybody else, it's great. You have to get a sort of an existing certification. But if your aim is to differentiate yourself, to differentiate your organization, to see the latest thinking, to know is actually valuable, then you probably want to look at something like this, a leading standard. And so there's one of the questions you actually want to sort of go and ask, what is it actually based on? So how do we, if you look at what I've just spoken about now, talking to, now looking at the PMI side, if you look at the view of their gold standard certifications, so PMI came out with the first edition in 1996. I think the British government came a bit earlier in the 80s. And then there's the second edition, etc. And then it goes to PMBOK guide. This was called a guide, not a guide book, but just a guide, or not guidelines. And really it was a description of the processes and things around the process. Whereas PMBOK version 6, this is where PMI struggled because they were meant to integrate the agile world into the PMBOK, I call them the PMBOK mafia, the guys that wrote the 49 processes or evolved to 49 processes, but they couldn't actually agree on the terminology or agree and actually how to combine it. So they just put the two together and it's 1,000 pages. It's the biggest thing they actually published. So then in 2021, they then totally changed it. So they changed from the actual processes, the 49 being the standard, to principles. So it's a 180-degree change to what a standard actually is. So from a process standard to a principle standard, and all the processes were dropped. And the difference actually here is that this was primarily driven by by Americans. This I saw actually the people on this are more Europeans. Principles are more of a European concept, from what I understand. And in fact, with this one, you have to sort of refer back into this, I think, for the exam questions. So even though it's a new standard, the exam questions, invariably the older ones, trail back at older versions. And then what happened in 222 is that this book, the process book, came back was reintroduced. So they realized the importance of describing not only the what is, but also the how as well. So when you're looking at a standard, the what is project management, what is PMO management, the how is more the process side. And so when I was on the version 4 of the portfolio standard, they said you're not meant to describe the how, and that's the knowledge areas, the process part, only the what. And I would respond back saying, well, surely people want to know how to do it, not just what it is. And what you see here is a reintroduction into the how to go and do it. So this actually links back, this actually really follows back to the content of this. So they try to change it into a principle based, but then realize actually that they need to have the two. So if you look at the link between the what and the how, this was combined. This is what and how, this is the what, and this is the how. So how are PMI going to go in the future? Are they going to have the two together or separate? This is something I discussed. If you follow the post I put on LinkedIn, I was actually in Switzerland with Professor Rolf Muller. He's the head of the advisory board. We actually agreed to actually separate the standard with the body of knowledge when we actually write the two together, because they're just too big and too cumbersome. So this question I posed down is, can a certification be considered gold if the underlying approach just totally changes radically between the two? And this is really a question for yourself. Is it a gold standard certification, or is it just a certification that provides value to you? And whether you want to call it gold, silver, or anything else is entirely up to you. And this is interesting as well, the what and the how part, and how it will actually progress, big question mark in the future. So now let's look at PMI's perspective on PMOs. So in the PMBOK version 1 to 5, they talked about 3 types of PMOs: supportive, controlling, and directive. Then you got 1 page out of 400 pages on it. And what's interesting that when you actually have people on the courses, they just talk there that they're totally into that, and they just say there's only 3 types. But literally, there's thousands of types of PMOs. We're only limited by the names, but people, when they see a standard or see something like this from PMI or an organization that influences people, they're brainwashed into believing that's actually true. On all the courses we've given, and we've probably certified 2,000 or so people, we never ever got one PMO when you map what they do into these 3 categories. None of them's ever mapped into these individual 3 categories, not one. And that normally means that the categorization is not a good categorization. Let's move forward. So PMBOK version 6, the first part talks about 3 PMOs, and the second part talks about many types of PMOs. There's a contradiction here. And in version 7, they dropped the 3 types of PMOs, and they call it a PMO and a value design office. So they describe what these 2 are down here. And then they return this one, and then we've got 3 types of PMOs. So what does it really tell you from PMI's view about PMOs? Well, they're not consistent, because they got these ones down. In fact, this actually came from the academics. It was never designed for this. PMI picked up on it and put it into this. And so we never had it. We never got any PMO to map into this. So really, I think the new one they're talking about is XMO or something like this. One thing is that you can't just change the name and say it's new. That's silly. All these change of names of PMOs is absolutely crazy. yes, you want to look for a PMO that's reflective in what you do, but there's not just like two types of PMO. A value design office. I mean, somebody writes us about the value office. Everything creates value, whether it's a finance department, whether it's a PMO, whether it's IT department. Everybody creates value, otherwise you wouldn't be part of it. To call yourself value makes absolutely no sense at all. It's just a PMO in a certain configuration within the organization. So I thought they may find that interesting about the lack of consistency on and how many types of PMOs there are. So it really goes down to who's writing it, what actually goes into this. Okay, so that was some insights. I hope you find that interesting. I'd like to hand over now to Martin, who will then talk about his experience in building several PMOs for his organization.
Thanks, Robert. You know, every time I listen to your online courses and webinars, there is something new coming up. And even now, listening to you, the final part where you described the inconsistency of PMI was very interesting, because I actually was a victim of this inconsistency. And the next part is what I'm going to tell you, how I was the victim. So a bit background. As I mentioned earlier, I was working in Dubai for about 15 years. Then I decided to move back to Bulgaria, where I joined Telelink Infra Services. When I was back in Dubai, I worked for several companies. Some of them were in construction, some of them in technological fields, but each and every company I worked for, I saw a problem. The problem was with regard that, you know, who were the project managers? And the project managers usually were the engineers, or the best engineers, who were put in the position of managing projects. And none of these companies actually looked at the project management field as a field that people need to be certified. They need to know more about how to run projects. There's so many different aspects of how you run successfully a project. And this brought me to the point where I said to myself, okay, I need to certify myself into something which will make me a better project manager. This was not the initiative of the company, it was my own initiative. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, what were the initiatives of people, you know, who want to get a certification? Well, this initiative was for me to broaden my perspective of how to run successfully project, because even earlier, when I was young project manager, I was seeing a lot of problems and I didn't know how to solve it. So there I go. I've chosen the PMI as a certification authority, and I obtained the PMP, Project Management Professional. And as you mentioned, there was only one page in the massive book of knowledge when I was certifying myself. It was the 5th edition, if I remember correctly. Only one page on PMO, Project Management Office. Now, fast forward to Bulgaria, I joined Telelink. My initial position was operations director. And I started noticing problems. Specifically, the problems were with various things like no framework, lack of standardized procedures, lack of tools. A lot of project managers were the best engineers, but they didn't know how to run successfully projects, resource bottlenecks, and so on and so on. And eventually we had a massive project that was a complete disaster. And that was the point where the CEO and the higher management of the company decided that a change has to be made. And what changed? What changed? The change was that a decision, a PMO to be formed, was made. And I was chosen to be the person who designs and runs the project management office. And, you know, funnily enough, nobody in the company knew what PMO is. The biggest problem which I faced. Even the CEO who said, okay, you do a project management office, he did not know how to describe it to me. So there I am. with my practical knowledge of running projects and also being head of project management in the past company. But now how to design and run a new PMO, this was something, completely out of the blue for me. So naturally, I opened the book which I was certified on, Project Management Professional, the body of knowledge. I opened the book and I found this one page that you mentioned. What is a PMO? So I found the 3 types of PMO, and that was pretty much it. So another problem. And as a project manager, I said to myself, okay, this is going to be a project I'm going to run, and how I'm going to run it. So I'm going to be starting from a charter. So let's do a charter. I need a higher support. I naturally knew that without support, the PMO is going to be a disaster. So higher support was required. The purpose and the high-level milestones, all the risks, the budget, the stakeholders, even the success criteria, this was something that I need to put in the charter. So I did all this exercise and I presented it to the higher management, eventually got approved, and this was the starting point of the PMO. The next thing, as running a normal project, you go in the planning stage. So I got a good team. This was the 3 good points. Good team, experienced people. Some of them are running projects for more than 20 years. So we sat together, we did a brainstorming, and we decided that we're going to split the planning stage into the 4 work streams. First was the target operating model. It was basically around the description of how the PMO will operate. I knew from the beginning that in a company which is with more than 25 years of history, establishing a new departments within the old departments with their own leaders and functional managers is going to be a big headache because naturally people tend to disapprove, tend to resist changes, especially when they try to safeguard their own realms of their own departments. And establishing a new department, this was going to be a massive fight, which it was. But with the target operating model, we said that we will resolve the resistance problem by designing how it will operate and how it will link with the other teams and functions within the organization. We also developed a very well detailed RACI matrix. So basically, the RACI matrix was the baseline of our target operating model, the TOM. This RACI matrix was pretty much the biggest fight until we managed to establish it and get it agreed with all the stakeholders. Pretty much about 2 months passed. And then the next thing was to get a domain of the PMO domains, the domain of concern, all the factors that can affect and control the influence of our PMO. Then the domain of influence, this was where our PMO services will be allowed to operate, and the domain of control. These 3 domains came naturally to us, but then later on in my certification, the first certification which I did as a practitioner, they came up as well. And this was a very good to know, but a very great thing to know that we're on the correct path. We are moving into the right direction. The process set was the other thing as well. Talent Infra Services is ISO 9001 certified. So what you mentioned as well was having specific processes is very important. So how we were operating within the company in the same processes and what we need to change to allow operation of project management offices within the other 2 main business units. Sales to projects, projects to procedures, communication flows, areas of responsibilities, and all these kind of things. The third work stream was the tool set. We had to establish, or actually we had already some tools in use, but we had to standardize, implement some new find some modern ways of improving the communication flows, for example, using cloud services for these tools. And last but not least was the implementation plan. Sadly, we did not have the time, the luxury of having time to implement the PMO. It was done on the fly. So when I said to the management gents, we need at least 3 to 6 months to design and pilot, they said to myself, no, a PMO has to be done today. You open right away. So yeah, this was the reason that we did some mistakes. Unfortunately, some mistakes were made. But fortunately, they were easy to recover. And as I mentioned, the IPMO practitioner certification was an eye-opener to me. So after about 3 or 4 months, I decided that as a director of project management office, I need to broaden my understanding of how a successful PMO needs to be run. And that's how I found AI PMO online. Pretty much, I would say it was the best moment of me running the project management office. Being part of the course was great. I shared a lot of information with a lot of people running PMOs, also part of this course. And one of the most important aspects of the training that I got was something that we initially missed. This was the project management services and capabilities topology. I would say I used this broadly. Also, the book that Robert, you mentioned, PMO services and capabilities, helped me a lot to establish what we had. We had more than 100 services without even knowing already implemented. And based on the book, we managed to find out what we have in a non-structured way to structure it. Then we identified the missing but required services. And last but not least, we identified also good to have services, outlined our capabilities and what capabilities we require to be able to provide certain new services. So this is all based on the book, PMO Services and Capabilities. Thanks to it, our PMO rose to the next level. So further, we identified some flaws. Already 1 year in operation, we identified that our PMO is rather inward looking. It's like you must use us, you must use our services, follow what we say, and not really looking into the outside, what the actual organization needs. Another flaw was that the services we offered versus the services we needed was not really looked into. And once we start looking into it and started working closely with our stakeholders, getting the feedback from what services we offered to them and what they actually needed was also very, very helpful to understand that these flaws needs to be corrected. And losing traction was the other biggest issue. Losing traction, the first year was, I would say, a success, but then in the second year, people started losing interest. We started losing the support, moving to the operational mindset of the people, and even worse, defaulting to the original ways. This meant that it's time to do a transformation or retire some of the services which we were offering and implement some new. So right now we're in the transformation stage, and as well we're planning the deployment of group level enterprise PMO. Here on the bottom you can see the Teleland group has also 4 other companies in 4 countries. So another challenge here is that each and every country, although being part of the same group, they have different coaches, different organizational level within the companies. So all this taken into account brings us to a level where we need to raise from the current level of the PMO to the next level, enterprise PMO. And the next level actually is another helpful tool for us. is the other book of AI PMO, the Portfolio Program and Project Principles. So for us to establish the enterprise PMO now, we are basing the new establishments on these 7 principles or 8 principles, I'm sorry, that you have in the book. So what the benefits of having a PMO, they're on the slides. Right now we have the tailored PM standards. Our projects are run in the same way, predictable way. We have a reliable reporting system, which was established by our project management office. This reporting systems allows the management to transparently see what's happening on the projects, something that was not available before. We also implemented risk and change management. Specifically, the risk management is done by the PMO for the projects. We try to implement risk management on every project run by the project managers themselves, but we found out that the project managers did not understand the specific of this risk management, and it's quite hard for them running the project and also running the risk management sessions and all that with the team. So we decided that we can do it for themselves. Portfolio management, and this is linked to the strategic alignment. This is something that we do as well for the company, and now we're raising it for the group level. And out of this already 2.5 years of operation, we also established three pillars that we're stepping on. Basically, everything that we do is stepping on these 3 pillars. The standardized project management, the transparent and regular reporting, and the efficiency of running the projects. And as a final words, I would say that AI PMO helped me a lot with both the certification that I did to actually see and broaden the horizons of our PMO, make it better PMO, and look further into the future. Because as I said, the biggest problem of the PMO is losing traction. Our PMO in the first year was successful, but then we started losing the traction. But now, based on what I learned from AI PMO and the certifications, I can say that now we have an excellent plan how we're going to run in the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for that. So Martin actually mentioned 3 domains. So the domain of control, the domain of influence, domain of concern. These are 3, this is part of a framework, one of the 9 integrated frameworks within this new publication. And we created it for several reasons. I don't have the time to go now, but what it does, it allows us a way to evaluate and judge PMOs or benchmark PMOs in a way that couldn't be done before. This is an integral part of what is actually required. And then as far as, so Martin on the courses, he attended the practitioner because of his 1 PMO, then he wanted to do multiple PMOs on the expert. And the expert is all about learning how you build up a PMO target operating model, so there's multiple PMOs. I don't really want to talk about the certifications, but that's the difference between 1 and then multiple PMOs. And invariably, organizations of any size will need more than 1. So you need to make sure you do it properly. So thank you, Martin, for that. Much appreciated. So now I'd like to go on to the big part on the announcement. There's actually a question. So there's somebody asked the question, is AI PMO part of the International PMO Day initiative? We're not part of the founding group, primarily because we weren't invited to be part of it. But my understanding about International PMO Day is really for everybody. So that's why we put a post out for all the researchers who actually provide a major part of understanding for which we then go and leverage. So really it's for anybody who actually is in the field of PMO management or stakeholders involved in some way. So I hope that answers your question. It's just a celebration day of which, we obviously are integral part of it, being an association and our focus on PMO management. The other groups are involved, what you will find, because there's a commercial interest in the other groups, is that the decisions taken who to include and who to exclude may be a little different to what you would do just in a general international celebration. Okay, so let's now progress announcements. So we'd like to actually announce that we have now the first draft of the PMO management standard. You probably guessed that from all the text before, when we talk about the do's and the don'ts of how you write standards or publications. We actually thought very seriously about, do we call this a standard? Or do we call this a body of knowledge, or do we call this guidelines? And the reason we want to call it a standard is really the ISO definition of where we look at the principles, the frameworks, the methods. And this is not the body of knowledge. That would be a separate document or separate book in the future. So it's basically a framework approach of how we're going to go and do it. It's taken us 7 years to reach today. Very few organizations would actually invest the time to do this because they want to just get it out quickly. So write it, get the team together, get it out. If it works, great. If it doesn't, well, we'll just write the next version. We actually spent a few years actually writing the 3 books beforehand. So if you want to achieve the most difficult thing, just like anything you practice, and you do the preparation around it. And that's why we wrote the Service Capabilities book. It was an integral part. The PMO Principles book, the Corporate Governance or Organizational Portfolio Program Project Principles. And there's several other books as well. But we've created a systems approach that's is very sophisticated. And that's why when we're looking at architecting, and I work myself with Professor Rolf Muller, and we design together, and then we write those different parts, and we bring information in. So if you have it in a structured approach, when you're building, for example, a sophisticated power station, we do the same approach with how we actually go and write. So this includes principles, frameworks, models, case studies. This actually makes it practical. So like in our courses, everything you see in this, we've actually tested out in projects. Other clients have tested it. In fact, we tested the concepts in the biggest project in the world, the biggest mega project. I don't think any other organizations have done that. So again, we take our time. We want to make sure we get it right. And I personally get involved in actually doing this as well. So I go on besides the writing and the teaching, I also go on projects and actually make sure this actually works. In this, we've defined success factors. So success factors, that's Pareto's principle, the law of the vital few. What are the few things that make the difference? We've actually now put the success factors down for every single phase of the PMO life cycle and every single phase of the PMO service life cycle. Something that ITIL didn't do for their service orientated or service management. Something that we have done, we've taken the time. We've also defined competencies, and we've got role and key attributes. And there's some other things in the book as well. And we've actually been testing different parts over the last 3 years. And what's interesting is when you actually put something separate frameworks together, you realize we have flaws in some of the frameworks. So some of the time has been taken how you jump between 2 frameworks and how you integrate it, making sure the terminology is okay. And that's why Ritu is absolutely key, because we have a lexicon of terms. We have a whole method of how we make sure all the books that are published, how we update everything. So we made a mistake, an errata, or if we actually have a change of terminology, then we do a reprint and update the terminology. So that's how we keep all the books actually current. We spend a lot of time building the whole system method of how we write multiple integrated books and keep them actually updated. So one of the key things is principles we spoke about. These are the principles we actually used in writing. So the first one is making sure there's no bias, so it's evidence-based, and it's on, sorry, it's actually, this should be good practice. Good practices in the field of PMO management. Relevance, so making sure that it's actually relevant, we're not just waffling about things. So it actually addresses the key issues and challenges that you face. It's consistent, it's coherent, there's a structure to it. The terminology I spoke about, it's complete. And this is actually quite a challenge of sort of what's in and what's out of scope. Conciseness, there's no repetition. Clarity, practicality, and accessibility. These are all the principles we write against. And when we go to the review teams that we'll be coming on to, is that we'll be asking, actually measure against each of these, how do we actually do, what do we actually improve when we go through the whole review cycle. So what to actually expect in here, we've got a lot of new concepts. And this is in the last 7 years of research, also testing concepts. So Martin talked about the domains, and he didn't have the time to explain it. But those are 3 concepts, and they actually came out last year from research, and we've actually been using them now for about 6 courses, 7 courses. And also the people that did the research, they went to consulting companies, and it seemed to sort of fit very well. People adopting these types of domains, or the use of the domains. The frameworks, so this is going from strategy formulation, to actually the execution part. So this is, you'll hear these terms. PMOs exist throughout the whole of the organization. So we couldn't just focus on the execution part. We had to look also on the strategy formulation part. We have two lifecycle frameworks. So that's the PMO lifecycle and the PMO service lifecycle, how they integrate together, the principles that we have also associated with it, success factors. So what are the few things that you need to go and do to focus on to make sure you're successful in that particular phase or whatever framework. And then the actual target operating models. So we talk about the PMO topology, the PMO service topology. That's all part of an operating model. So how you create them. And we've actually got 3 real case studies. And that's what we do in the courses, is that we have real case studies. So Martin, for example, when he's in the P&E course, he might have been a client or a consultant solving another participant's real problems. And that's the difference of what we have in our courses versus others. They use cookie cutter standard textbook case studies. Ours are real ones that we don't even know what the problem is. We select the team and we run it over the 5-day period. And so you actually get something that comes out of it. And we actually give an example of case studies here, how you actually apply it. We've got a business case example, and also we've got a complete, well, I'd say complete, there's always things you miss out, but the whole categorization of principles, frameworks, methods, artifacts, etc., which actually goes to about 40, 50 pages. So it's something that you can use as a resource, and we have all the sources of where you find additional information. If we were to write it into a book itself, it would probably be several hundred pages because there's so much there for you. So we just give you what the name is and the reference point for that. And there's some other things in there as well. So this is what we're actually doing. The research topics for 2023. So AI PMO has always said that we are research driven. We're the first ones in the world to actually set up the relationship between ourselves and a business school, and that's Swiss Business School. And so these are 3 topics that we're actually looking at this year. So how to determine the health of a PMO management profession? So how many successes and failures are there? Nobody's researched into that. And that's something that in putting the presentation together and working with the student is to really sort of say, well, let's say you use the word health. How do we determine how success and failure rates can influence the PMO management profession? Because failure isn't always a failure. So that's the first one. Second one, what is the relationship between the PMO's proactive reactiveness and the potential benefits of a PMO that they can achieve? So we had this discussion now over the last few months in the courses and saying what people's views are. So are you working, say, 60% reactive, 20% proactive? We were discussing it. We did a little mini case study on this thing, and it seems to be a very interesting topic. So we actually had one of the mega projects, and they work in a very reactive way. And we say, well, what's your ideal way of working? They were sort of like, okay, I'm used to reactive. That's the way I work. But when you look at people in a new team, new PMO, they said, no, we have a much higher proactive side. We're going to plan a lot more. And it may be there's an optimal point between a proactive and a reactiveness of a PMO, and depending where they're in the organization. So that's another research topic. We just don't know the answer to it. We can guess, but probably will be wrong. And that's a nice thing about research, is that we can explain and the findings are repeatable as well. The next one is actually maturity models. So really maturity models are not applicable for PMOs. We know that. We had some research by Peter Call as one of my students. Are there better approaches to assess, benchmark, and compare PMOs? So when you hear this sort of best PMO award, it's highly subjective. In fact, you may have a sick PMO. In fact, we actually had some people on courses, and their PMOs, I wouldn't say would be world performing, and they may have won or come up very highly into the categorization. And it's really, how do they get there? And was it really objective, or were there subjective elements? We're trying to make sure that we have provided an objective way of actually doing it. So it's a continuation of existing research. So these are 3 examples of topics that will be carried out this year. If people are interested in doing research, somebody wrote about how do I do research? You need to have a Master of Science, so a graduate degree. And then it takes 3 years. It costs about $40,000 to pay for the fees. It takes a lot of time and money, so it's a big investment. And there's 5 success factors for doing a PhD. One is time, one is money, one is motivation, your supervisor, and access to journals. So make sure you actually have those 5 success factors in place before you actually think about doing a PhD or a DBA, because it's a big commitment and it's a lot of money, and you're going to be very passionate about the topic as well. So those are the topics we're going to consider. There are some other ones, but the other students haven't yet decided about what topics they are for this year. So now, if I can hand over to Ritu, she's going to talk to you about reviewers for the standard.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, so we would like to invite experts to review our new book, the standard book. And this step is absolutely critical, even though it might take weeks and months to finish this process, but it's very important to ensure that the books meet the highest standard of quality and accuracy. And all the 3 books, AI PMO books that are on Amazon, went through several rounds of reviews. It took us months, but as I mentioned, it was very important to improve the book structure and just to make sure that the quality is absolutely great and there are no issues or errors. And we also make sure that we have people, reviewers from all over the world, and they represent a range of perspective and voices. Now, coming to requirements, you have to be an expert in the field. That's the first thing, of course. But also having access to the 3 AI PMO books is very important, because all these books are interconnected, and having read these books will help you understand the concept given in the next book also. So it's important that you have a copy of these 3 books, and preferably IPMOP or E certified. If you have attended the courses, you would understand better what's written in the book, and it's important for the review process. And of course, you should be good at meeting deadlines. So I will share in chat the link of the form that we have on our website.
So on the reviewer side, thank you for that, Ritu. When I reviewed the portfolio standard, the way the PMI does it, anybody can actually review. The problem is I would get like 400 comments on a chapter like governance, and 390 comments really you could ignore. It's just on the 10 comments. People sort of say, oh, it's a comma here or something like that. We really want to look at the heavy hitters, the people that really understand it. So we have typically about 50 reviewers. We say not everybody will be selected. We'll get them from the different continents. And because the people have been reviewing the first set of 3 books, invariably want to review this one and the other ones, but we'll probably be looking for an additional 10 to 20 people in actually doing that, because this is arguably the most important book that we will be publishing out of the set of books. Standards are always very important. Any sort of questions? Sorry, I should have really talked about that. I have some more questions a bit later. So Rita, you're going to publish that link.
Robert, sorry to interrupt you. I cannot find the setting to share the link with everybody. It's only with hosts and panelists. Can you do that as a host?
I will do, yeah. So what I can do is
I don't see the option.
The Q&As. Can you the question one on the question bar?
Okay.
You can. Oh, sorry, on the chat bar. Isn't there a chat bar?
No, the chat bar is only. I see the message can be sent to only hosts and panelists, and
well,
no one
send
else.
it to me. Send it to me, then I will.
Okay. Okay.
Then just post it out. So if you do that now, I'll do this.
Yeah, it's done.
Okay, great. So let me just send to everybody webinar chat to everyone. So here's the link for everybody. So it's actually a form that you fill in, and then Ritu will actually manage the whole process. It will take us time. Being actually the first one to look at the review comments coming in, we actually do it in the series. So we have the heavy hitters first of all. And for me, it's like when you write something, okay, yeah, they got a point here, a major rework, but it's important to sort of accept feedback, improve it, and then we go through typically 3 rounds of reviews. So by the time we actually publish it, then it's in very good shape. So if you're interested in that, please just fill in the form, and then Ritu will get back to you. Oh, it's actually down here, sorry. This is the form here. Okay, so now we're on to the questions and answers. So what I would suggest, if people want to sort of ask questions, if you actually want to speak aloud, we can actually unmute the microphone. There's a question here about how do we become a partner. We originally had partners. In fact, for example, House of PMO was a partner in the UK, and then they decided to certify. They did their own certifications, so they went their own way. We'll be looking for partners in other countries. We have a selection criteria how we go and do it, but we want to actually get the standard out first. Have the new website that's live to improve the membership section. You can check on registrations and things like this. And also there's like a partner section as well. And then we'll start looking probably towards the end of this year. As I said, we want to walk before we run. Okay, we've been walking for some time, but I think you can see the work that we're publishing compared with other PMO certifications. It is a very robust, and you're getting really the latest knowledge for which you can then look at actually how you apply yourselves. Okay, so somebody asked the question, what's the pros and cons of having two PMOs, an EPMO and a technical PMO? It's the, what's the word? It's determined how long is a piece of string. We had a person from Switzerland. He was the COO from a pharmaceutical company, so one of the Swiss people. He wanted to go from two PMOs to one, and when he was in the, I think he was in the expert course, the practitioner of the expert course, we actually went from 2 to 3 PMOs. There's a whole methodology of actually how you go through. This is a methodology that's been evolving for 7 years. So when people just think you need to have one PMO, you invariably need more than one PMO. And in fact, you'll find in the standard, we actually look at structural flaws, and these are part of the case studies and how we actually solved it. So I can't answer the question, what are the pros and cons of an enterprise PMO and a technical PMO? It's just a name. In fact, if you look at some of the research papers or publications that PMI sponsors, that people like Monique Aubrey and Professor Rolf Muller, actually they write on behalf of PMI, there's multiple names for the same thing. So it all depends on what the enterprise PMO is doing or what the technical PMO is doing. What is the need of the organization? Are they addressing that need? Is one PMO better serviced at actually creating that service, and then the other one, do they just need to offer it? There's multiple questions that go in there. And that's one of the challenges of writing the standard, is how do you make something that's complex into easy to understand, or at least allows you to start, and then for you then to get access to consultants, or be able to grow into that role where you can decide whether you want 1, 2, 3, 4 PMOs. But it's not just deciding that, it's actually going through a whole methodology to then determine and how you actually structure it. And that's called a target operating model, and the method to actually create your target operating model. So 5 million enterprise, 5 million PMO. How is my organization? APA works, hence the question. Is it AUD, Australian dollars? Enterprise PMO 5 million. I'm not sure APO works. I'm not sure what you're trying to say there. Basically, you have a budget for your PMO, you'll be doing things, as Martin described, that he was quite surprised how much he was actually doing, but invariably it's a choice of whether you have one, it's a choice of what services you provide, or which ones you retire, because invariably there isn't unlimited benefit. I mean, unlimited budget, sorry. So somebody's got their hand up, so let me find who that person is. And I'll allow you to talk. Okay, here we go, I'll have to talk. Can you talk now?
Hi, Robert. Hi, Robert. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, Ken. Hi there. Good afternoon.
Hi. Good afternoon. Robert, I work for an organization called APA, Australian Pipeline Association. And I joined the organization only in the last 3 months. And I realized that all the IT initiatives, which are in excess of 5 million Australian dollars, they are governed by enterprise PMO, whereas anything that goes below 5 million, it falls under the umbrella of technology PMO. Okay. Now, the organization is still evolving from a PMO and from a PM perspective. And so they are still building up the capabilities both in the project management and project management office space. And hence I wanted to know, because I'm still into my first quarter within the organization. And are there any specific challenges that you or your team foresees when it comes to purely, having two types of PMO, where the functions are predominantly governed by the dollar engagements?
It's a good question, but this is not the forum to actually ask that, because it's actually, sure, it's a simple question, but there's a lot in understanding before I give an answer. My suggestion for yourself is, if you haven't been on a course, if you want to get an answer to that, come on the course and use your company as the case study. And then what you have is 2 others that are assigned to you, and there may be consultants who are getting certification, there may be other people, and then you can actually look to understand much more and then provide that feedback to your organization. I could answer it or some of it, but I'm not going to because it would take too long, and we've only got 9 minutes before we hit the 90-minute session. But good question. I'll see whether maybe Darko could actually contact you and continue with that conversation.
Thanks, Robert.
I appreciate the call, much appreciated. Other questions we've got? Let's have a look. As a PMO practitioner, what is the one to do if there is no strategy defined and the PMO is required? And the PMO is required to develop a governance of project management framework. What is there to do if there is no strategy defined? Well, the fact that you exist, there is a strategy that sort of says we need to have a PMO. The one thing required to develop a governance and project management framework. Well, there's a lot of questions that go into this, and this is all part of the design piece. When we're actually looking at the organization or looking at your particular one, this is Kawaja, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, is actually looking at a current state assessment. So we need to actually look at where are you placed, how many people in your PMO, what was your mandate, or what is your mandate is actually defined. What's the project management level of maturity? What's the PMO maturity or impact level? What are the challenges of the organization, and what type of organization is it? So we need to understand more, because you see, you have that context, I don't know that context, and therefore you actually need to have a sort of conversation around it. If you would put me on the spot, a gun against my head and sort of say, what is the one thing, if there was no strategy defined to develop a governance and PMO, I would actually look at the governance aspects of it first of all, because when you've got the governance there, then you actually look at the authority of actually doing something. And then the second thing is actually create the framework. For the project management framework, having developed frameworks pretty much all my life. And in fact, we do a game called the Spaghetti Towers game. This is where you create towers out of spaghetti and marshmallows. It's very simple, children do it, but we've turned it into creating a methodology on how you build it, principle-based methodology, a procedural-based, and a mix. And you'll be amazed, none of the procedural methodologies have ever worked in doing it. The point being is it's very complex to actually create a framework. So it's something that we need to have a conversation on, because what you don't want to do is create something that destroys value or disables the organization. This is what Eli Goldratt would say, is that he's a production engineer. If you get the chance, read his books. The first book he wrote was called The Goal. It's really good. He's got several other books, The Theory of Constraints, The Critical Chain, that's all from Goldratt. He would say that a bad policy is equivalent to a bottleneck. If you create a framework that doesn't work, that's actually inhibits the organization, that's a bottleneck. So you really want to make sure you get more understanding around it. And if you need advice from that, I would again suggest to talk to Darko, who will contact you, and then see what we can do to help out on that. Any questions about the announcement? Was it a surprise to people? Is it something that, when we've been working on this for several years for the standard? Is that something you think is going to be useful for yourselves? Everybody's quiet. Okay, we've got a hand up here. Okay, you can talk. SK.
Thank you, Dr. Robert, for answering the question.
It's a pleasure.
Just a bit of it that lately I have been, the organizations I've worked with, they just perhaps they'd heard of PMO and they just get somebody with the PMO experience on board, and they didn't just know what to do, and they would just simply ask, do everything, whatever it has to. So you would go back and ask, what's the business strategy? And they wouldn't have anything. Mm-hmm. So in that context, I asked the question because there was no end to get to start with to do one's work. Even right now, I'm working with a client and I'm simply asking them, what is the PMO there to do? So they simply say, just design a governance structure and a project management framework for us. So it is really, really challenging to build something just in the air, which I'm not sure. I really do not know how is it going to work. So that was one. And with regard to
carry on.
I'm actually really excited to hear about the standard, that maybe I'll be able to give them something that this is how things work. So I'm really looking forward to it, what it's going to show.
Yeah, what you're describing is actually quite typical. I won't say normotypical. So, for example, that you probably guess or know the project I was working on recently. You'll find that many CEOs know they need PMOs but don't know what they do. They just hear they need it. Your guys have said, look, we need a PMO. We just do governance and project management framework because that's all the two things they probably know. I'm surprised they don't say, oh, set a supportive or directive or controlling PMO up. The things which you need to understand is where the problems are. We actually have a team on a mega project that what we came in to do, we then totally changed. We had to write all the requirements for this particular area, something that we didn't know, but our consultants, the top guys, some of the top guys, they teach as well, and able to go and do it. And now they're actually implementing all the processes within a PMIS system. So it's a custom built system that we're actually doing. So it's really addressing the needs. And I think that's where you need to get credibility. And there's a book that Mark Price Perry produced, and I've met him once or twice. He talks about the business-driven PMO. He basically says, look, whatever the top thing your boss needs, get it done. He was talking about to the CEO, then do the next one and the next one. So that's all well and good, getting credibility and buying time. But then you need to put something substantial and sustainable in place, and that's where the frameworks come into it. So you want to understand really what are their pain points and look at addressing that. And it may be that governance framework, or it may be the governance or the framework, or it may be something else. So you need to really assess what's going on, look at what their pain points are, see whether it's in the domain of influence, domain of control. And if it is, then look at how you can actually do it and make sure you've got the resources, the capability to go and do it as well. So I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. That's really encouraging. I'm actually working on these lines. There are a few problems with project selection and its complexity decision. So there, I think I'll get into the details of from the standard, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, with the project selection, when we do the case studies, it depends. We write generic case studies. So one for the manufacturing industry, we wrote one for actually a big ministry in Saudi for the AI, artificial intelligence. And in the case study, we actually look at the symptoms of a lack of portfolio selection or project selection. That's one of the things you do want to sort out, is actually the whole of demand side. Because if you don't have that portfolio piece, it's quite likely that half the projects you're doing are just not needed. And the other half are, but you haven't got the resources to deal with the half that are, and you're wasting them on the resources that are not needed. But that's, again, if you did it, I don't want to keep selling the course, but we have that case study that if you're on that, we'll look at your problems and looking actually how to solve it. People, and this is what actually Martin did. That's why he came back on the expert course. Wanted to set up a whole lot of PMOs. We had also another mega project, a senior guy, a director that came on, and basically they worked till 10 at night time with his team to actually solve the problem. So what he solved in 5 days, but he wasn't able to do in months beforehand. So maybe it's a suggestion for you.
Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Other questions from anybody else? Okay, we've got a few more down here. Are we going to receive the slides? The slides we're going to put actually in the membership section when we get the new site up, but the aim is we're going to create a video or a video out of it. That's something I need to give to the video team to go and do, so you'll actually see that. Let's have a look. Okay, I think there's all. Oh, Ian sort of said, thanks very much for looking forward to the new book on the standards and the book on data-driven PMOs. Both will be very well received, I'm sure. Yeah, you see, for us, we have all these outlines of the books actually done. Some are in writing. In fact, one, for example, we've started about 1.5 years ago, but we stopped because we had to change of priorities, or we get called out on a consulting assignment, or we want to test something else out. But the thing is, I made the commitment now to get the standard, and really the hard work is done so over the last couple of years, and now it's down to the review team. You guys are going to struggle. I mean, at first you will, and then you start clarifying, and then we better go through the process where then the people that read it when it's finished, all the hard work of all of us, myself and the other people involved, will then sort of come through to the finished book itself. So yeah, thank you for that, Ian, much appreciated. Any other questions from anybody else? Okay, if not, just on the certifications, I'll just quickly show you this. We have a core set of certifications. What's interesting is if you look in Europe, people follow through from F to P to E. If you look in the Middle East, they all like to go to the expert course. And we are very insistent, because these build upon each other, you've got to do the F to do the P to do the E. So we've had consultants from Deloitte's, I mean, we teach Deloitte's, KPMG, McKinsey's in Saudi Arabia, and other organizations come to us on the consulting side. In fact, most of them do, and they certify with us, and they go then to the clients and then go and teach them. And so they go through these steps. So I would highly advise to go and do that. On the renewal side, we actually have thought about it a lot. PMI looks at PDUs, but you can buy these things. What we're saying is come on the course again. I think we give you 75% discount. And the people that are renewing now, they were on the version 1 of materials, and now we're on version 7, and it is totally different. So really what you're doing is sharing your knowledge with others. You are learning all the latest concepts. You can have a case study. You could be the client, and you just pay, basically it's just a small amount for the fixed cost of the course. So this is actually what we do for the renewal side, or you go to the next level up, clearly ease the top level. Then we have these these foundational ones. Consulting frameworks is not, these are not meaning simple. These means that they're foundational for your knowledge. So for senior people, consulting frameworks, it's really McKinsey work. I teach this at university for master students at Aarhus in Denmark, doctorate students, as well as professionals, where we're actually looking at building frameworks, and it's quite difficult to go and do that. So we solve real problems, we frame the problem. This is the service and capabilities course for the book itself. So when you're actually looking at all the 5 stages of the life cycle, we don't have enough time on any of these courses to really cover the S&C book in detail. This one does it in 3 days. This is 3 days. But then we have these specialist certifications. We originally did a lot, then COVID came, and then we stopped doing it. And then now with the new website, we're probably going to reintroduce these as asymmetric or pre-recorded. So these are the ones we're doing. And they invariably will be, it's all the latest information and knowledge that goes into it. So say we update these twice a year, and then these ones here, they're updated on a yearly basis for that. If ever you want to get in touch with us in Switzerland, this is Wollerau, so it's in Canton Schwyz with the Swiss Army knife, that's the canton. In fact, it was one of the first 3 founding cantons or states of Switzerland. So we're in this building here, that's our building. And that's the Lake of Zurich on the other side. So a very nice place to be, very inspiring in Switzerland. So I think that's it. Is any other questions? No, if not, then I wish everybody a wonderful day today. Thank you for making time over lunchtime or the evening, if you're in Asia, or in the morning in America. And say do contact or write in if you're interested in actually being part of the review team, which would be greatly appreciated. Is there anything I missed, Martin or Darko or Ritu?
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you for joining, Martin. Much appreciated. Ritu, thank you as well for explaining.
Thanks,
how
Robert. Thanks, Martin.
So I wish everybody a great day today. Happy International PMO Day.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.